there has been an update to the Texas age verification law. And I want to talk about this law a little bit more in detail again and talk about the court ruling that has just been made. Thanks for checking out this video by Switch to Linux. I wanted to bring this more time-sensitive story here because the Texas age verification court case has had a ruling. We'll get into that ruling and what that means here in a little bit. But of course, we've been following the age verification and attestation rules. We looked, of course, California's, which is a law already that they just made a carve out for open source software. Colorado's bill has the open source software at the time of the signing, with some questions about does it really apply to GPL licenses or not. And I think people are split over it. Some people say yes, some people say no. The Texas law is an age verification using fun words like must use a commercially viable means to verify the age of the user. Well, that's quite terrifying. But it may or may not actually apply to Linux because of the way the rule is written. But still, it is a dangerous law. And what is particularly interesting to me is there is a very contentious Senate race going on this year in Texas between Ken Paxton and James Tallarico. And Ken Paxton, of course, has been the Attorney General for a long time. He's had a few controversies in his past. He is certainly the person that most Republicans and conservatives would really love to see win that race. James Tallarico is a little bit of a freaky dude. And that's about as polite as you can be. He has a history of talking to students that he was a teacher of at like just before midnight when he was like an early 20-year-old talking to, teenage girls. He has a lot of weird, other strange, controversial stuff. Clearly the person that those on the left would really like to vote for. But if you know anything about these Texas Senate races, they tend to walk a very fine line and they can be easily swayed. And what Ken Paxton may not recognize is that his staunch support of this rule may actually lose him that Senate seat. I kind of want to talk briefly about why that is. Mostly it has to do with the fact that, hey, who else is in Texas but Louis Rossmann, who absolutely stands for a lot of these things and has a lot bigger influence than a lot of the more conservative views. And he simply says, I don't care what letter is after your name. I care about consumer rights and privacy and things like that. And it could very well be that sways the state, which has had narrow wins on these seats. It could very well sway it not towards Tallarico per se, but against Ken Paxton, who is so interested in passing this law. So let's go ahead and talk about this law. And thanks if you're still with me on all that political stuff, but you guys got to realize, you're like, we're talking politics again. Like, your lack of studying anything about politics is what put us in this situation. So pull your head out of your rear end and start paying attention to what's going on around you. I'm going to tell you that. All right. So this is Senate Bill 2420. This has been passed into law, but it is currently injuncted. So in the injunction, they can't fully enforce this, but the original injunction by the appellate court has said, yeah, you're not allowed to do anything. Texas has to treat this law as if it has not been passed. And so none of these requirements have been placed on anybody yet until today, the first day after the ruling. We'll get into that, but let's look at what this law says first. So first is there's a duty of app stores. Now, and that is where this one is interesting and may not apply to the open source world in many instances. Now, it would for Valve or Steam. It would for any other system inside of the FOSS world that may require an account. But it specifically relies on verbiage talking about app store accounts. So if Ubuntu comes down and says, you have to have an account to access your Snap Store, they would fall under this jurisdiction if their distribution is distributed in Texas, and it is. Not saying they're going to do that, but it does kind of sound like one of those things that Canonical might actually do. I don't know. But anyway, so the duties of an app store, they have a duty to verify the age categories. When an individual in the state creates an account with an app store, the owner of the app store shall use a commercially reasonable method to verification to verify the individual's age under, and it lists all of the age categories that curiously Texas and California all agree on. There's a lot of backdoor deals you may not know about. They just want us fighting among ourselves. All right. And so what's interesting in here is the commercially reasonable method of verification. Now, these things have been created. There's actually subsidiary companies of Roblox that have age verification rules. Now, some of these require an AI age selfie, and I am not doing that. I have crossed the line. Anything that requires me to do an AI age selfie, I'm not going to do that. They could require you to upload a ID. Well, I'm not going to do that. They could require you to enter a credit card number. I will do that. If I have an age verification method that simply wants to know I'm over the age of 18 and it will accept a credit card input, I will certainly do that. That is what Apple is using. Apple's already doing a lot of this kind of stuff, but the way they have it set is if your account is super old, like if you've had Apple their entire life or their ecosystem on the same account, they're assuming you're over 18. Additionally, if you have any form of payment method stored in your Apple account, they are already assuming you're over 18. And so most people will never have that. But for new people who create an app account on Apple, new people will have to do some form of age verification, whatever that happens to be. And so we've kind of reached this weird point in stagnantness towards in consumerism in the world and business, where what seems to happen here is that we've reached this peak. We just can't go any better. No bigger companies are going to come over. Yes, that could probably still happen. But nobody can create new accounts these days without verifying themselves. Remember, now I think I have several Google accounts that were put together for various business purposes, and those were all put together well before they required active phone numbers and things. So oftentimes you log into a Google account, they're like, "Hey, you haven't given us your address yet." Like, why the hell do you want my address? I don't need anything. I don't need you to ship me anything. But what's important here is that this requires this for an app store account. So if you're not creating an app store account like on Linux, it probably doesn't apply to you. So parental consent is required, if you want to download the weather app. Yes, that is here. Okay, if the owner of the app store determines that an individual is not under the adult category, which would be 18 years of age, the owner shall require the minor's account be affiliated with a parental account belonging to the minor's parent or guardian. Now, this is another serious problem in this bill is, do you just assume every account is not the correct age? What is their way of determining how old you are if you're not under adult? You don't have 8-year-olds running around with ID cards. I mean, of course, now school IDs might be a thing. We might see somebody start requiring that, but of course, I wouldn't allow my kid to put their school ID on the internet either. It's just as bad as the photo ID on the internet. And so what's interesting here is effectively to create an account, you'd have to be a parent and then somehow create another account. And I guess you're attesting this is a person. So it's kind of like the California law in this respect, except it requires that adult to verify, not just attest, verify they're an adult. And that's why the Texas law goes too far. You want me to use some external third-party shady company that's going to leak my data all over the internet like a sieve, all to protect the children, when all of these app store companies already have these things in place. Just utilize them if you want to utilize them. Maybe better education to tell parents this is actually in there is a good thing, but to force this kind of stuff is nonsense. But if they determine the account is not an adult, it has to be affiliated with a parental account. And for an account to be affiliated with a minor's account, the owner of the app store must use a commercially viable. So, they have to require that this app is stored in. Now, how do you prevent the prevent the kid from attaching that account to his uncle's account or an older friend or an older brother, other random stranger on the street? How long before we have crazy psychos that have quote unquote verified adult accounts for people that they have groomed on the internet and are now providing the parental account for the kid, and now you have intensified the potential of problems? Have you thought about this, Texas? Of course you haven't, because you're a bunch of technological ignoramuses. All right. The owner of an app store must obtain consent from the minor's parent or guardian through the parent account affiliated with the minor's account prior to downloading a software application, purchasing a software application, or making a purchase in or using a software application. The owner of the app store must obtain consent for each individual download or purchase sought by the minor. I would like to check the weather on my phone, Mom. I got to verify myself again. Especially since what's interesting here is there's a further provision, we'll get to it, that requires information to be deleted once verified. But then how do you re-verify? How do you make sure the same ID is not being used for hundreds of different accounts? They're not deleting the data. All right. An app store must obtain consent for each download and notify the developer of each application software if a minor's parent or guardian revokes consent through a parental account. So you have to tell the developer that. Somehow these developers are doing this, which of course this makes sense if you're involved in modern software. There's a bunch of stuff in here about software developers, wasn't particularly relevant to our discussion here. Information for the software application developers. The owner of the app store that operates in the state shall, using a commercially viable method, allow the developer of the software application to access certain information related to the age, category, and whether consent has been obtained. Okay, so there is a provision here for the protection of personal data. The owner of an app store that operates in the state shall protect the data by limiting the collection and processing of personal data to the minimum amount necessary for verifying the age of the individual, obtaining consent, maintaining compliance records, and transmitting personal data using industry standard encryption protocols that ensure data integrity and confidentiality. Now, Part C is the Trojan horse. Maintaining compliance records. This means if the state comes in and says, well, have you verified all these? Of course we have. Here's all of the records of all the verifications. How do you possibly do that if you my train of thought has derailed because of the stupidity of this nonsense. This means that they have to keep on file the information they collect. That's what this means. There is now a central repository of all of this age verification stuff that you're doing. Is it a credit card? Is it an ID? What is the possible means? Somebody is maintaining a record. Even though there is a provision down here that says the developer of the software application. Now, there is a difference, though, between the developer of the software application and the owner of the app store. So the app store has the ability to keep all this information on file, which is the hack. Of course, they're using a commercially viable method. Google doesn't want to store all that information, so they're using these third-party businesses, which are propping up all over the place because of this. It's a new opportunity for scammers, and a new opportunity for shammers, and a new opportunity to peddle more money, and a new opportunity to collect more data to feed into your know your customer stuff, which ultimately feeds the data broker industry and the darknet hackers who want your ID to verify themselves on Google's platform so they can do a bunch of scamming under your name instead of theirs, of course. But the developer of the software application may use the personal data to enforce restrictions and protections, ensure compliance, implement safety-related features and default settings. The developer of the software application shall delete personal data provided by the owner of the App Store under these sections on the completion of the verification. So the App Store, the App Store must keep on file all of the information it's collecting. The software developer may not keep it. Sure. That is the whole of the law. It is fairly small. So what is the update? Now, as I said, this went into the appellate court. There was originally an injunction which prevented them from actually enforcing it. But what just happened here, and let me make this thing bigger. It's going to mess up my screen layout here, but we're going to do it anyway because I want to be able to actually see this law here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that or not. Let's do now. Let's see if what we can do here. Let's go 100%. All right, we're just going to try and do the best we can here. This is super short anyway. It's like 3 pages. It's actually 2 pages. The first one's just a declaration. All these people that you should vote against Ken Paxton. I think, I don't know. I don't think we have a good option either way, but vote against Ken Paxton because he just thinks us. Now, to be clear, Ken Paxton's current role is the state attorney general. Will he continue to shill for this nonsense when he is a senator? That is a different question, but he's already doing weird, questionable things, so get him out of office. That is my take on this one. All right. Not that I really like the other guy either. I think they're both bad options, but effectively it is literally this paragraph. This is all they have ruled on. Administrative panel, under advisement of the appellate's motion to stay the district court's universal preliminary injunctions pending appeal. That motion is in the briefing stage. The appellate reply in support of the motion is dated June 2nd, 2026. Pending a ruling on the motion stay pending appeal, it is ordered that the preliminary injunctions are temporarily and administratively stayed. What does that mean in legal terms? Well, in legal terms, what that means is that the order that stops them from collecting this information has been lifted. So this is not a close to the case. The case itself has not been ruled on. But Texas is now allowed to start requiring this as if the state it allows. So what does this mean? This means that app stores are now in a gray area. Technically, the state can do this, but because it is under litigation, the state could not actually carry out any penalties against anybody for violations. But if they find violations, investigate, and log violations, those violations will be stayed until such time that the final case is litigated. If the final case is litigated and the rule is considered unconstitutional, because it is, because you cannot compel a software application to put something in the code, if it is ultimately ruled unconstitutional, then all of those cases, all of those stays, all of those fines will simply disappear. But if the odd chance that crazy activism judges and morons who do not understand the Constitution and the freedom of expression, if they happen to prevail and say that the Texas law stands and can be enforced, all of those fines would retroactively be applied. Which means we will probably start seeing app stores start deeply enforcing this in the state of Texas. Texas is lost, folks. Sorry to tell you. But there is our update on Texas and the age verification law. Let me know your thoughts about this dystopian nonsense down below, and definitely look up from that book of 1984, which is supposed to be a dystopian warning, not a universal playbook. Governments of the world. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.